The Odysseus drifted from its jump into the silence of a new solar system. Its crew awoke to a breathtaking sight: the verdant world of Kepler 186f, hanging like a perfect emerald against the void. Their mission was simple and monumental: to terraform this new Earth for humanity's future. But the first orbital scan revealed a single, impossible anomaly. A rhythmic energy signature pulsed from the surface, an artificial heartbeat where only wilderness should exist. By the end of this story, you will witness the terrifying discovery that redefines the very meaning of life itself. What awaits them is not a passive world to be shaped, but a living, conscious entity with its own ancient rules. Will the crew recognize they are not pioneers, but invaders in a sentient garden? What would you do if the planet itself was watching you? The violet soil felt soft and strangely warm beneath Commander Ristova's boots, a silent cushion absorbing the historic weight of her step. "We are the first. Let's make that count." Her words hung in the air, thick with the scent of alien pollen and the low, melodic hum of unseen insects. It was a scene of profound, almost sacred, peace. Then every bioscanner on her team's wrists lit up at once. A synchronized chorus of frantic, crimson warnings. The serene chirping of the meadow did not change, but the data screamed a contradiction. Something immense was moving just beyond the deep purple tree line. A biological signature so massive it dwarfed their lander. It was a presence that should not exist. Their orbital surveys had shown a world rich in flora and simple fauna, nothing larger than a small dog. This signal was the size of a building, and it was gliding through the forest without making a sound. The crew stood frozen, their triumphant moment shattered, staring into a wall of alien vegetation that now felt less like a frontier and more like a watching eye. Dr. Eris Thorne knelt, his attention captured not by the colossal life sign but by a small, unassuming plant. Its structure was a marvel of alien geometry, with leaves of interlocking crystal that refracted the purple sunlight into tiny rainbows. It was beautiful, a piece of the planet's quiet artistry. He reached out, his gloved finger gently brushing against one of the crystalline facets. The plant did not just bend. It retracted, folding in on itself with a soft, chime-like sound, pulling its entire form back into the warm, violet soil as if it had never been. It was a motion of impossible grace and speed, a defense mechanism far beyond any earthly flora. His scientific mind raced, trying to categorize the action, but his instincts screamed a single word: intelligent. He looked up from the empty patch of soil, his eyes sweeping the tree line. And that was when he saw it. Standing just within the shadow of the colossal, deep-hued trees was a figure. It was tall and slender, its form shimmering like heat haze over a desert, semi-transparent and composed of what seemed to be woven light. It had no discernible features, no mouth or nose, but a smooth, ovoid head tilted slowly to one side, a gesture of pure, unblinking observation. The creature made no sound. It did not advance. It simply studied them, a silent witness to their intrusion. For 3 heartbeats, the entire world seemed to hold its breath. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, the entity dissolved. It didn't run or fade. It unraveled into the ambient light, its form dispersing into the air like mist under a morning sun, leaving behind only the undisturbed forest and the profound, ringing silence of their disbelief. It was Eva, the mission's communications specialist, who finally broke the stillness. Her voice was a fragile whisper, a crack in the dam of their composure, transmitted directly to the ship orbiting high above. "Odysseus, we are not alone down here." The simple sentence, devoid of panic but laden with a universe of implication, traveled through the void and into the command deck of the starship. On the surface, the crew stood paralyzed, their mission of conquest instantly transformed into one of trespass. In orbit, the message landed not as words, but as a cold wave of reality. a chill that seeped into the very bones of the ship and every soul aboard. Back aboard the Odysseus, the silence was louder than any alarm. Mission Specialist Ben Carter's hands shook as he isolated a single frame from the surface team's helmet cam feed. The shimmering, light-woven entity filled the main screen, a ghost in their machine. His voice, usually so steady and analytical, cracked with a tremor of pure disbelief. Look at the spectral analysis. It's not carbon-based. There's no biological structure as we understand it. The readings are showing pure, structured energy. He zoomed in on the data stream, a chaotic dance of numbers that defied every known law of physics. It's holding a coherent form without mass, without a cellular framework. This isn't life. It's something else entirely. That single phrase, something else entirely, shattered the last vestiges of their professional composure. The mission's unified purpose, a goal they had trained for and dreamed of for years, splintered in an instant. The quiet hum of the ship's life support was suddenly drowned out by the rising tide of frantic voices. An invasion, someone whispered from the back of the command deck, the word hanging in the air like a poison. We were sent here to reshape this world, to seed it with our own biology, but it's already inhabited. We aren't terraformers, we're a plague. A fierce debate ignited, tearing through the crew. One faction, led by the chief engineer, argued for immediate withdrawal. We have no right, he insisted, his face pale on the monitor. We touch one crystal plant and a sentient energy being watches us. What happens if we try to melt the ice caps? We could be committing a genocide we don't even understand. The other side, driven by the pressure from Earth and their own ingrained mission protocols, pushed for caution but not retreat. Our entire species is counting on us, another specialist countered. We can't just run from a ghost, we need more data. We have to establish contact. The command deck became a cacophony of fear and duty, a microcosm of humanity faced with the utterly unknown. They were no longer a team with a clear objective, but a collection of terrified individuals staring into the abyss of their own ignorance, forced to decide the fate of two worlds with a single, impossible choice. The debate on the Odysseus was silenced by a more immediate physical threat. As the alien sun dipped below the horizon, casting the purple forest into deep twilight, a series of sharp, urgent beeps erupted from the lander's control console. Eva's voice cut through the rising panic on the comms, her tone tight with controlled alarm. Our primary power is failing. Cells are dropping too fast. It makes no sense. Commander Rostova watched the main display in horror. The numbers plummeted from a healthy 98% to 50, then 20 in the span of a single minute. The interior lights of the lander flickered violently, casting frantic, strobing shadows across the terrified faces of her crew. Then, with a final, soft sigh, the power died completely. The hum of the environmental system ceased. The console screens went black. They were plunged into a profound and absolute darkness, sealed in a metal coffin on an alien world. For a long, breathless moment, the only sound was the ragged symphony of their own breathing. Then, as their eyes adjusted, the world outside the viewport began to glow. It started as a faint, shimmering luminescence from the bark of the nearest trees. Then the undergrowth ignited with soft, pulsing light. Within seconds, the entire forest surrounding the lander was awash in an ethereal, blue-green radiance. It was the same exact light that had composed the entity they had seen hours before. This was no random natural phenomenon. The rhythmic pulsing was a coordinated display, a silent, collective bioluminescence that felt intensely deliberate. They were not just in the dark. They were being deliberately shown that they were surrounded, cut off, and utterly at the mercy of a consciousness that could drain their technology with a thought. The lander was now a dark island in a sea of living light, and the connection to the Odysseus, their only lifeline, had been severed along with the power. They were truly alone. Lena Petrova's voice sliced through the stunned silence inside the powerless lander. "They are draining our power. This is not a mission anymore. It is a siege." Her words were sharp, metallic, with a raw, human fear that everyone felt but had not yet voiced. "We have to signal the Odysseus for an immediate evacuation. We are not equipped for this." But geologist Marcus Reed shook his head, his face a mask of stubborn resolve in the eerie glow from the forest. "Our mandate is to establish a foothold, Lena. We cannot run from shadows. This is why we are here, to face the unknown, not to flee from it." His argument was a desperate grasp for normalcy, for the mission parameters that had defined their entire lives. That critical rift in command widened into a chasm in the darkness, paralyzing them with indecision. They were no longer a crew, but a fractured council of war. Just as the argument reached its peak, a soft, insistent chime echoed through the lander. It was the emergency backup system, powering a single external motion sensor. On its tiny, flickering display, a ring of red dots appeared. They were closing in from all sides, moving with a slow, deliberate purpose through the luminescent undergrowth, tightening an invisible noose around their stranded craft. The debate was over. The shadows were no longer running, they were here. The low hum began as a distant tremor, a vibration felt in the bones before it was heard by the ears. It swelled into a deep, resonant frequency that made the lander's hull groan in protest, its metal skin shivering as if gripped by a colossal, invisible hand. Inside, the crew clutched at their seats, their own teeth rattling from the overwhelming sonic assault. Then came the light. Dozens of smaller forms, no larger than a human hand, swarmed from the glowing forest. They were insectoid in their skittering, chaotic movement, living shards of the same shimmering energy as the tall observer. They did not approach the viewport. Instead, they streamed directly toward the lander's sealed main airlock. In a horrifying, silent display, they did not open it. They phased through the solid metal hatch as if it were nothing but smoke, pouring into the cabin in a torrent of incandescent fury. The first one brushed against Marcus's arm. He did not scream. A wave of absolute numbness shot through his body, dropping him to the floor, his limbs unresponsive, his mind screaming inside a prison of paralyzed flesh. Another touched the main console, and where its light made contact, the few emergency readouts they had flickered and died, the data itself seemingly erased, corrupted into meaningless static. This was not an attempt to kill. It was a systematic, precise, and terrifyingly efficient demonstration. They were being disarmed, disabled, and catalogued by a force that treated their advanced technology and their very bodies as trivial inconveniences. In less than a minute, the swarm retreated, phasing back out through the hull and vanishing into the luminous night, leaving behind a crew of helpless, paralyzed figures and the chilling certainty that they were not just outmatched. They were being studied. Paralysis gave way to a primal, desperate need for distance. Eva's voice cut through the groans of the recovering crew, sharp with command. "Everyone up. We are leaving now. The primary systems are dead and the Odysseus cannot hear us. Our only chance is the emergency extraction point, 2 kilometers to the east." Move. There was no time for debate, no time to question her authority. They scrambled, helping Marcus to his unsteady feet, their bodies still buzzing with the memory of that numbing touch. They abandoned the lander, bursting out into the cold, alien air, the forest's bioluminescent glow their only source of light. The ground was soft and yielding underfoot as they began to run, a frantic, disjointed pack fleeing through a nightmare fairy tale. At first, the forest seemed to allow their passage. The eerie silence was profound, broken only by their ragged breathing and the thud of their boots. But after a few hundred meters, Lena risked a glance over her shoulder. Her breath caught in her throat. The path they had just carved through the undergrowth was gone. It wasn't simply overgrown. The massive, violet-barked trees were shifting, their roots slithering like serpents through the soil, pulling the trunks laterally to form an impassable wall. The luminous foliage knitted itself together, creating a dense, living barrier that sealed their retreat completely. They were not just being hunted. They were being herded. The planet was not a passive stage for their drama. It was a conscious, intelligent warden, and it was actively, physically funneling them toward a predetermined end. Every twist in the path, every opening between the trees, felt less like chance and more like a deliberate turn in a maze designed by an unseen architect. They were running, but they were not escaping. They were being delivered. The path ended abruptly at the edge of a vast clearing. The frantic rhythm of their flight shattered into a stunned silence. Before them, rising from the violet soil, was a structure that defied geometry. It was a monolith of pure obsidian, so dark it seemed to be a hole cut out of reality, a void given form. Its surface was not smooth, but covered in intricate, swirling glyphs that pulsed with a soft, internal light, the same blue-green radiance as the forest. As the crew staggered to a halt, the glyphs reacted. Their gentle pulse quickened, brightening in a wave that traveled up the structure's face, a silent, acknowledging ripple that felt intensely aware of their arrival. Dr. Eris Thorne, drawn by an impulse he could not name, took a step forward. His gloved hand, almost of its own volition, reached out and made contact with the cold, dark surface. The moment his fingers touched the obsidian, his body went rigid. His eyes snapped wide open, seeing nothing of the clearing, his vision flooded with images that were not his own. He saw eons scrolling past in a dizzying torrent. He witnessed other ships, strange and alien, descending through the atmosphere. Some were crystalline, others metallic and angular, all visitors to this emerald world. He felt their intentions, their curiosity, their arrogance, and he saw their fates. Some were gently guided away, their systems mysteriously failing until they retreated. Others who had begun to dig, to build, to terraform, were met with the forest itself rising against them. Vines of pure energy lashed out, technology crumbled into dust, and the planet absorbed their presence, leaving no trace behind. It was a history written in light and loss, a record of countless others who had come with the same ambition as humanity. Eris gasped, wrenching his hand away as if burned. He stumbled back, his face ashen, his breath coming in ragged pants. He looked at his crewmates, his expression a chaotic mix of terror and awe. His voice was a broken whisper, laden with the weight of millennia. "It is a library." He swallowed hard, struggling to form the words. "A tomb, a warning, all of it. This planet is not just alive, it is a custodian. It has been here, judging newcomers for longer than our species has walked the earth. We are not the first to try and claim this world. We are just the latest name on a very, very long list." The silence that followed Eris' revelation was absolute, broken only by the soft, rhythmic pulse of the Obsidian Monolith. Lena Petrova, her mind reeling from the vision of a galactic graveyard, stumbled back from the structure and fell to her knees. Her hands trembled as she unclipped a data pad from her utility belt, its screen miraculously flickering with a sliver of reserve power the energy swarm had missed. Her training as a systems analyst took over, a desperate anchor in the storm of the unknown. While the others stared in horror at the living library, her fingers flew across the screen, isolating a single, repeating glyph sequence from the torrent of alien history Eris had glimpsed. She ran it through the Odysseus primary linguistic database, a system designed for first contact, now tasked with translating a warning millions of years old. The process was agonizingly slow, the pad's processor groaning under the weight of the impossible data. When the result finally flashed on the screen, her blood ran cold. Her face, illuminated by the pale blue light of the pad, lost all its color. Her voice, when it came, was a hollow, broken thing stripped of all hope. She read the words aloud, each one a hammer blow to the foundation of their mission. The garden is sentient. The garden protects itself. Leave the seeds be. For a moment, no one moved. The words hung in the air, simple, direct, and utterly devastating. The term terraforming curdled in their minds, its meaning twisting from a noble act of creation into a violent, profound desecration. They had not come to cultivate a barren rock. They had been sent to rip out the seeds of a conscious, living world and replace them with their own. They were not gardeners. They were vandals in a sacred, self-aware space, and the gardener had just handed them their final warning. The ground beneath their feet began to tremble, a low, grinding shudder that had nothing to do with geology. The violet trees groaned as the soil split open, the living forest floor pulling apart directly before them to reveal a steep, spiraling ramp descending into absolute darkness. They had no choice. The path behind was a solid wall of wood and light, and the only way forward was down into the planet's embrace. The air grew warmer and thick with the scent of ozone and rich, wet earth as they descended, the only light coming from the faint, terrified glow of their own suit lamps. The ramp opened into a cavern of impossible scale, a subterranean cathedral so vast its ceiling was lost in shadow, and at its center hung the source of everything. It was a colossal, crystalline heart, a nexus of intricate, interlocking facets that pulsed with a slow, rhythmic, blinding light. From it, a web of glowing roots, thick as ancient oaks and shimmering with the same blue-green energy, radiated out in every direction, burrowing into the cavern walls and ceiling, connecting this central organ to every corner of the planet. This was the core, the conscious engine of the world they had come to conquer. Then the voice came. It did not sound in their ears, but bloomed directly within their minds, a deep, resonant vibration that felt both ancient and infinitely sad. It was not a language of words, but of pure, translated concept. You bring death in your pockets. The accusation was a wave of cold clarity, carrying with it the image of their own terraforming seeds, the genetically engineered microbes designed to overwrite this world's biology. Your machines are a cancer. This thought was accompanied by a visceral understanding of the lander's power drain, of the swarm's disabling touch. It was not an attack, but an immune response. The planet saw their technology, their very mission, not as a tool of creation, but as a metastatic disease, a plague they had innocently, arrogantly, carried into its very heart. They were not the cure, they were the infection. The choice bloomed in their minds not as words, but as two divergent futures. Deactivate your seeds, leave this place. Never return. The alternative was a chillingly serene image, a vision of their own bodies dissolving, not into death, but into the luminous web of roots around them, their consciousnesses preserved, woven into the planet's awareness to stand guard for eternity, watching for the next invaders. A permanent sentinel duty. The silence in the cavern was broken by Eva's sharp, desperate cry. No, we have a duty to Earth. Billions of people are counting on us. Our families, our entire species is dying out there. We can't just surrender, we have to fight. Her voice echoed in the vast space, a tiny human sound against the immense, silent pressure of the planetary mind. But Marcus did not look at her. His gaze was locked on the pulsing, crystalline heart, his face a landscape of crumbling certainty. He had seen the library's history, the countless ships turned to dust. His voice, when it came, was a quiet counterpoint to her fury, a whisper that carried the weight of a dying star. What if our duty, Eva, is to not make the same mistake here? What if our highest calling isn't to save humanity, but to prevent it from becoming the very destroyer we fear? His question hung in the air, a moral chasm opening between them. To fight was to embrace the arrogance of every failed civilization in the planet's memory, to risk utter annihilation for a cause that now felt like a profound sickness. To surrender was to betray every person they had ever loved, to condemn their kind to a slow, certain extinction. There was no winning move, only a choice between two different kinds of oblivion, and the fate of two worlds rested on which path their broken spirits would choose. The choice was a chasm, and Eva's defiance echoed in the vast chamber, a final desperate plea for the world they had left behind. But high above, on the cold, sterile command deck of the Odysseus, Ben Carter had already made his decision. He watched the live feed from the cavern, Eva's face contorted with anguish, the silent, pulsing heart of the planet radiating its judgment. To him, compromise was not wisdom. It was the slow, cowardly death of everything he had sworn to protect. While the others were paralyzed by the moral abyss, his training took over. He moved with a grim, quiet purpose to the ship's emergency armory, his actions shielded from the main comms channel. His hands did not shake as he assembled the compact, high-yield charge, a device designed for geological reshaping, now weaponized against a living world. He believed he was not committing an act of sabotage, but one of salvation, a surgical strike to cut out a cosmic cancer and save mankind. He transported to the surface in a single pilot scout pod, its landing a whisper in the clearing near the cavern entrance. The planet offered no resistance as he descended the spiraling ramp, the obsidian walls seeming to absorb the sound of his footsteps. He saw his crewmates frozen before the colossal heart, their faces etched with a terror he misinterpreted as weakness. He did not call out. He moved like a ghost along the periphery of the cavern, his suit's camouflage struggling against the overwhelming radiance. The intricate, glowing roots made no move to stop him as he placed the magnetic charge directly onto a primary crystal facet of the heart itself. His finger hovered over the arming switch. For one fleeting second, he saw not a monster, but a beautiful, impossible machine that held the key to Earth's future. Then he pressed it. A single red light began to pulse on the device, a rhythmic counterpoint to the planet's own serene glow. It was the most arrogant sound in the universe. The reaction was instantaneous and absolute. The cavern did not roar, it simply moved. The great, luminous root he stood beside, which had seemed as solid and immobile as stone, uncoiled with the speed of a cracking whip. It wrapped around his torso and limbs, not with violence, but with an unbreakable, gentle firmness, lifting him from the ground. He was held fast, a fly in a web of living light, the armed charge still blinking mockingly on the crystal surface below him. The voice that filled his mind then was no longer sad or questioning. It was final, a pronouncement from a judge who had seen this play out 1,000 times before. Violence is the only language your kind knows. The words were not spoken but branded onto his consciousness. Now you will be silent. Ben tried to scream, to explain, to justify, but no sound escaped his lips. His body began to glow from the inside, a soft, golden light that seeped from his pores. He did not feel pain. He felt a profound unraveling, a dissolution of self. His form blurred at the edges, then streamed away in tendrils of incandescent mist, drawn into the nearest glowing root. His consciousness, his memories, his defiant rage, all of it was siphoned away, absorbed into the infinite, silent network of the planet. In less than 10 seconds, there was nothing left of Ben Carter but a faint, shimmering afterimage, and then nothing at all. The explosive charge on the heart winked out, its technology rendered inert, absorbed back into the very system it was meant to destroy. The message was terrifyingly clear. Force was not an option, it was a recipe for erasure. The cavern did not erupt in anger, but in a wave of silent, terrifying integration. From the walls and the ceiling, tendrils of pure light uncoiled like waking serpents, flowing toward the paralyzed crew with a gentle, inexorable purpose. They did not strike with violence, they reached out to touch. Lena Petrova saw one coming and tried to recoil, but her body was locked in a primal fear. The luminous filament made contact with her forearm. There was no pain. Instead, her flesh and the suit's fabric simply began to phase, dissolving into a cloud of shimmering, golden particles. She could only watch in open-mouthed horror as her own arm unraveled before her eyes. But the true violation was not physical. A torrent of information, her entire life's knowledge of engineering, systems architecture, and human technology, was being siphoned from her mind. It felt like a cold river pouring out of her skull, every schematic, every line of code, every memory of her training being downloaded directly into the planet's vast, waiting intelligence. This was not an attack. It was a data harvest, a horrifyingly efficient method of learning everything about the invaders and their capabilities. In less than a minute, the tendril withdrew. Lena's arms solidified back into its normal form, whole and unharmed, yet she felt profoundly empty, as if a core part of her identity had been copied and filed away in an alien library. The planet now understood human technology, not from observation but from direct, intimate experience. It knew their weaknesses, their strengths, and the full, desperate scope of their mission. The assimilation wave receded back into the walls, its work complete. The crew was left physically intact but psychologically shattered, knowing they had just given the enemy the one thing they should have protected, the complete blueprint of humanity itself. The feeling of violation was a cold echo in Lena's bones. She stared at her hand, whole and undamaged, but the memory of its dissolution was more real than the flesh. Her knowledge of fusion drives and quantum processors was no longer hers alone. It was now a part of the planet's immune system. "We have to warn the fleet," she whispered, her voice hollow. "If they send the next wave, the planet will see them coming with our own eyes." Eris grabbed her arm, his grip firm, his own face pale with a shared dread. "We need height," he urged. "We need to get a signal out before it learns how to block every frequency we have." Eva, her defiance now channeled into a raw, survivalist focus, simply nodded, her eyes scanning the cavern for an exit. The planetary mind offered them none, the spiraling ramp they had descended now sealed by a wall of solid, fused rock. They were trapped in the heart of their enemy. Then Marcus pointed a trembling finger upward. There, high on the cavern wall, a narrow fissure glowed, not with the planet's blue-green light, but with the faint, hopeful silver of the alien moon. It was not an invitation. It was a flaw, a tiny crack in the planet's perfect control, and it was their only chance. The climb was a desperate, harrowing ordeal. They scaled the glowing, living roots, their hands and boots slipping on the smooth, energy-saturated surfaces. The air grew thinner and colder with every meter they gained. Below them, the great heart pulsed, its rhythm unchanged, a silent observer to their pathetic struggle. They did not know if it was allowing their escape or simply did not care. Finally, they hauled themselves, gasping and exhausted, out of the fissure and onto a windswept ridge high above the forest canopy. The emerald world sprawled beneath them, breathtakingly beautiful and utterly terrifying. Eva scrambled with the heavy, emergency transmitter from her pack, her fingers fumbling with the clamps and antennae. She powered it on, and a single, weak green light flickered to life. It was working. She opened a channel to the Odysseus, her voice cracking with urgency as she spoke into the mic. "Odysseus, this is Surface Team, do you copy? Abort all missions, repeat, abort all missions. KEPLER 186f is inhabited by a planetary intelligence. The terraforming protocol is genocide. Warn the fleet, warn everyone," the words poured out, a desperate, final confession. But as she finished, the transmitter's light turned from green to a frantic, pulsing red. A wave of visible distortion, like heat haze, rose from the forest below, washing over them in a silent, crushing tide. The device in Eva's hands whined, its components overloading as an invisible force of pure energy flooded the spectrum. The signal shattered into a burst of static, a final scrambled scream lost to the void before the transmitter died completely, its circuits fried into silence. They had delivered their warning, but they would never know if it was heard. The ridge, their last sanctuary, was now just another cage, and the planet had just demonstrated it could reach them anywhere. The broken transmission from the surface was a ghost in the command deck speakers, Eva's final, desperate words dissolving into a hiss of static. Captain Ilya Volkov's hand rested on the cold console, his knuckles white. The silence that followed was heavier than the void outside the viewport. His executive officer, a man named Kalen, whose entire career had been built on following procedure, was the first to break it. His voice was tight, a blade of pure logic. "Our orders are explicit, Captain. We are to secure the planet for the terraforming fleet, not to negotiate with ghosts or heed the panic of a compromised ground team. We have a protocol." Ilya did not turn from the screen, from the image of the emerald world that had just swallowed his friends. His voice, when it came, was low and carried the weight of a terrible new truth. "Our orders, Zoe, were based on a lie. We were told this world was empty, a blank slate waiting for our hand. It is not. We are not pioneers. We are the invaders here." The air on the bridge crackled with the tension of a universe splitting in two. On one side stood the old certainty, the chain of command, the survival of billions back home. On the other stood a moral abyss, the undeniable evidence that they were committing an act of profound violence against a being of incalculable age and intelligence. Kalen took a step forward, his posture rigid. "The mission parameters do not account for sentient resistance, Captain. Our duty is to Earth. If we fail, our entire species fails with us. We must initiate contingency Gamma, a low-orbit bombardment to neutralize the threat." A murmur of agreement rippled through one side of the bridge, the faces of those who saw only numbers, only the cold calculus of survival. But Ilya saw the faces of his crew on the surface. He saw the library, the heart, the silent, patient judgment in the light. To bomb that world would not be a military action. It would be a blasphemy. "You would have us burn a library of galactic history," he said, his voice rising for the first time. "You would have us murder a consciousness to save our own. What does that salvation even mean if it is built on such an act?" The command deck fractured before his eyes. Crew members who had served together for years now stood divided, their hands hovering near sidearms, their loyalties torn between their captain and the mission they had sworn to fulfill. The mutiny was not a shout, but a cold, silent schism in the heart of the Odysseus, a battle for the soul of humanity playing out in the unforgiving silence of space. Captain Volkov's command cut through the rising tension on the bridge. "All weapons are to stand down. Our only objective now is to retrieve our people and evacuate this system." The order was a seismic shift, a complete reversal of their purpose, and for a moment the bridge was utterly still. Then Security Chief Rostov, a man whose entire life had been dedicated to protecting human lives at any cost, took a single, deliberate step forward. His hand rested on the pulse pistol at his hip. "I cannot allow that, Captain. This ship and this mission are the only hope for our species. To abandon it is to sign the death warrant for billions." This is not a rescue, it is a surrender. The air itself seemed to fracture. Alarms blared to life, not from an external threat, but from the ship's own internal security grid as loyalties shattered. The first shot was not aimed at a person, but at the main navigation console, erupting in a shower of sparks that cast frantic, strobing shadows across the divided crew. The command deck dissolved into chaos. The carefully orchestrated harmony of a starship's heart became a battleground. Crew members who had shared meals and laughter for years now dove for cover behind consoles, returning fire with sidearms never meant to be used against one another. It was a civil war, a brutal, intimate conflict sparked not by greed or power, but by a fundamental, irreconcilable divide over what it meant to be human. Was their duty to preserve their kind through any means necessary, even if it meant becoming the monsters they feared? Or was it to recognize a greater truth, that some lines once crossed could never be uncrossed, and that survival without morality was no survival at all? The corridors of the Odysseus echoed with the sharp reports of energy fire and the desperate shouts of former comrades, a microcosm of the impossible choice the planet below had forced upon them, tearing itself apart from the inside. The sharp crack of energy fire inside the Odysseus was the final desperate noise of a species turning on itself. But outside the ship, in the profound silence of space, a different kind of response was already unfolding. On the surface of KEPLER 186f, the planet's luminous heart pulsed once, a deep, resonant beat that sent a silent command through its entire global network. The entity had tolerated the intruders on its surface. It had studied them, warned them, and even absorbed one of their violent members. But the escalating conflict in the orbiting metal shell was a different class of threat. It was a nest of instability, a hive of chaotic, destructive potential that could not be allowed to persist. The planet shifted its attention from the individuals to the source. It was time to swat the fly. High above, the first warning was a sudden, massive power fluctuation. The lights on the Odysseus flickered and died, the artificial gravity stuttered, and for a terrifying second, every soul aboard was weightless, floating in the darkness amidst the fading trails of their own gunfire. Emergency systems clawed back a dim, red illumination, but the main viewport was no longer filled with the serene backdrop of stars. It was occluded by the atmosphere itself. The sky below them was no longer a placid emerald green. It was churning, coalescing into vast, swirling storms of pure energy. From these vortexes, shapes began to rise. They were not solid, but they were immense, each one larger than the entire starship. They looked like living constellations, formations of lightning and starlight woven into the silhouettes of leviathans. There were sweeping, winged forms that blotted out the sun, and colossal, serpentine shapes that uncoiled from the upper atmosphere with a grace that was utterly alien and deeply menacing. They were not ships. They were manifestations of the planet's will, energy given purpose, and they were rising toward the Odysseus with a slow, inexorable intent. Their movement was not a rush, but a deliberate, closing maneuver. They were not trying to destroy the ship. They were surrounding it, cutting off every potential escape vector, herding it as effectively as the forest had herded the ground team. This was a quarantine protocol on a planetary scale. The mutiny inside the ship suddenly felt trivial, a petty squabble in a cage that was being slowly, methodically sealed shut by a god. The bridge was a tomb of flashing red lights and the groans of dying systems. Ilya Volkov moved through the chaos not as a captain, but as a ghost, his authority stripped away by the mutiny and the greater power now dismantling his ship from the outside. He found them in a secondary corridor, a small cluster of faces he trusted, their eyes wide with a shared, desperate understanding. To the escape pods, he ordered, his voice a raw scrape. "We are not abandoning them, we are going down." The race through the shuddering corridors was a nightmare of buckled plating and the screams of tearing metal. They launched their pod into a sky that was no longer sky, but a living tapestry of celestial wrath. The energy leviathans, vast as moons, turned their silent attention toward the tiny, fleeing craft. For a heart-stopping moment, Ilya was certain they would be swatted into atoms, but the formations did not attack. Instead, they shifted, their luminous bodies weaving apart to create a single, narrow corridor through the storm. It was not a path of escape, but a chute, a deliberate funnel guiding them directly toward the planet's surface. They were not breaking through a blockade. They were being permitted to pass, their descent approved by the very intelligence they had come to conquer. The pod plunged into the atmosphere, its hull screaming against the heat of re-entry. A falling star granted a temporary reprieve by a god that had already made its judgment. The escape pod tore through the canopy, its landing a violent, grinding crescendo that ended in a jarring silence. Ilya stumbled from the wreckage, his ears ringing, his vision swimming in the familiar, alien purple twilight. Through the haze he saw them, Eva and Eris emerged from behind a thicket of glowing ferns, their faces etched with an exhaustion that mirrored his own. The reunion was not a celebration, but a collision of shattered realities. Eva reached him first, her hands gripping his arms, her words tumbling out in a frantic, desperate stream. "Ilya, listen to me. It doesn't want to kill us, it never did. It wants to understand us. It needs to know why we keep coming, why we bring death. It is trying to find a way to stop us without having to erase us." Her explanation was a key turning in a lock, illuminating the planet's actions in a terrifying new light. The power drain, the paralysis, the assimilation, it was all a form of interrogation, a desperate attempt at diagnosis by a cosmic physician faced with a recurring plague. Eris, his gaze fixed on the distant, pulsing light of the cavern heart, added the final, crucial piece. Lena, when it touched her, it didn't just take her knowledge. It left a connection. She is a bridge, a two-way conduit. She can still feel its presence, a hum in the back of her mind. She is our only chance. The new plan formed not from hope, but from absolute necessity. They could not fight. They could not flee. Their only remaining option was the one their mission had never considered, to offer a partnership instead of a conquest. They would use Lena's fractured, integrated consciousness as a communication channel. They would not offer the planet their terraforming seeds, but a shared future. They would propose a symbiosis, a trade, humanity's knowledge and ingenuity offered freely in exchange for a sanctuary, a place to learn and coexist, to become a part of the garden's ecosystem rather than its master. It was a desperate gamble, a plea for mercy from a judge who had already passed sentence on their entire species. They found Lena in a small grove where the violet soil gave way to pure crystal. She was no longer entirely human. Her body was semi-transparent, a ghostly silhouette through which the planet's glowing roots pulsed and coiled, holding her in a gentle, living cradle. Her skin shimmered with the same soft light, and when she opened her eyes, they held the vast, ancient sorrow of the planetary mind. Her voice, when it came, was a haunting hybrid, her own familiar tone layered over a deep, resonant vibration that seemed to emanate from the very air. "I can feel its thoughts," she whispered, the words echoing slightly. "Its loneliness is a canyon deeper than any ocean. It has watched civilizations rise and fall for eons, and it is so tired. But its fear of our kind is what drives it now. It sees us as a perfect, self-replicating weapon, a blight that consumes everything it touches and then moves on, forever hungry." She looked at Ilya, a flicker of her old self breaking through the cosmic haze. "It is willing to listen, but this is the last chance, not just for us, but for all of you who might follow. I will be the bridge. We have one opportunity to speak, to offer a different path before it enacts a final, permanent quarantine of this entire star system. It will sever this world from the galaxy to ensure we can never find it again, and it will not hesitate to eliminate the current infection to do so." The choice to proceed was a silent, shared understanding. They were not just pleading for their lives, they were bargaining for the soul of their species, and their only translator was a woman who was slowly, irrevocably, becoming part of the garden she was meant to destroy. Lena's body became a conduit, a living lens focusing the entirety of the human experience. Through her, the crew projected a raw, unfiltered data stream into the waiting consciousness of the planet. It was not a curated presentation, but a torrent of our entire history. They sent the soaring architecture of symphonies by Beethoven and the ancient, haunting melodies of tribal chants. They transmitted the serene beauty of a Van Gogh starry night, and the chaotic, vibrant stories told in cave paintings. They showed the selfless courage of strangers pulling each other from rubble, the quiet devotion of a parent comforting a child, the boundless curiosity that sent probes sailing beyond the solar system. But they did not hide the darkness. They let the planet feel the visceral terror of a battlefield, the chilling logic of a concentration camp. the relentless march of industrial machines stripping a world bare. It was a plea built on brutal honesty, a desperate gamble that the whole truth was more valuable than a sanitized lie. We are a paradox, the transmission seemed to say. We are capable of creating breathtaking beauty and inflicting unspeakable horror, often within the same generation. Do not judge us only by our worst instincts. The appeal hung in the air, a question mark etched into the fabric of reality itself. For a long, agonizing moment, nothing changed. Then, the aggressive energy formations high in the atmosphere, the leviathans that had sealed the Odysseus in a cage of light, began to slow their relentless, swirling dance. Their movements, once purposeful and menacing, became hesitant, almost contemplative. The violent pulses of light within them softened into a gentle, rhythmic glow, like a great heart pausing to listen to a new, unexpected rhythm. The planetary mind was not convinced, but for the first time it was truly listening, confronted not with a weapon or a demand, but with the profound, confusing symphony of what it truly means to be human. The response did not come in words, but in a wave of pure memory that crashed over them. It was the planet's autobiography written in light and time. They felt the first single-celled organisms stirring in a warm, primordial sea, not through competition, but through a gentle, collaborative dance. They witnessed the slow, patient unfurling of the first crystalline leaves, the forests growing not as individual trees fighting for sunlight, but as a single, interconnected being sharing nutrients and awareness through a subterranean web of glowing roots. They saw the arrival of other visitors not as invasions to be feared, but as curiosities to be studied. Some were gas-based life forms that drifted through the upper atmosphere, sharing songs of solar winds. Others were silicon-based entities that communicated through shifting geometric patterns in the sand. For a billion years, this world had been a sanctuary, a cradle of life in an infinite variety of forms, all existing in a delicate, symbiotic balance. It was a history of profound peace, a testament to what life could become when it chose cooperation over conquest. And then they felt the planet's deep, enduring sorrow as it showed them the others, the ones like humanity. Species that arrived with lasers and drills, with a hunger that could not be sated. Worlds they had stripped bare, leaving behind only dust and silence. The planet had not destroyed them out of malice. It had simply encouraged them to leave, gently redirecting their ships, dissolving their structures, showing them the door. It had only ever used force as a last, reluctant resort to protect the sanctity of its garden. The vision receded, leaving them gasping on the crystal floor, the weight of a billion years of serene existence pressing down on their human-scale souls. Then the proposal arrived, a simple, stark set of conditions etched into their minds with the clarity of a diamond. You may remain. The offer was not a gift, but a test. You will be observers, chroniclers of the garden. You will learn its ways and carry its story. But your ship, your technology, all the tools of your terraforming will be deconstructed. They will be absorbed, their materials returned to the soil, their knowledge archived within me. You will live here as part of the ecosystem, not as its masters. You will be permanent guests. The choice was absolute. They could become refugees from their own kind, surrendering every artifact of their civilization for the chance to exist in this paradise under its terms. Or they could refuse and face the same gentle, final eviction as every other destructive species that had come before. There would be no negotiation, no compromise. The garden had made its final offer. High above the planet, the command deck of the Odysseus was a graveyard of flickering screens and frozen conflict. The energy leviathans had ceased their menacing dance, their forms now holding a silent, watchful stillness. Captain Volkov's final transmission, ordering a full evacuation and the scuttling of the ship, echoed in the sudden quiet. The choice was no longer about the mission, it was about legacy. A young communications officer, her face still smudged with soot from the fighting, was the first to move. Her hands did not tremble as she entered the command codes. She understood the math of survival. If the Odysseus remained, even as a derelict, its navigation logs and terraforming archives were a beacon, a roadmap that would lead the next human fleet directly to this garden. To leave it intact was to guarantee another, possibly final, war. One by one, the remaining crew, those who had fought for the mission and those who had mutinied against it, added their authorization. There were no more arguments, only a shared, grim resolve. They were not just destroying a ship. They were burning the only bridge back to their old lives, erasing humanity's claim on this world to protect it from humanity itself. The final command was a single, soft chime. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the Odysseus core reactor went critical, blossoming into a silent, brilliant flower of light in the void. The expanding wave of energy vaporized the great ship, consuming every hard drive, every sample, every record of their doomed ambition. It was a funeral pyre for their future, a sacrifice offered not in fear, but in a terrible, hard-won understanding. On the surface, the crew watched the new star flare and fade in the night sky. It was a light that sealed their exile and their covenant. They had traded a starship for a world, and in that final, tragic flash, they finally understood the cost of peace. The last embers of their old life faded into the black, leaving only the stars and the soft, living pulse of the world beneath their feet. The colossal energy forms that had filled the sky dissolved like mist, their silent threat receding into the planet's placid atmosphere. Around them, the forest's aggressive luminescence softened, the frantic, warning pulses settling into a gentle, rhythmic glow, a heartbeat returning to its resting state. The air itself seemed to warm, the scent of ozone replaced by the rich perfume of night-blooming alien Flora. Lena, now more light than woman, turned to them. Her form was a vessel for the planet's voice, but her smile was entirely her own, a fragile bridge between what they were and what they must become. "The garden accepts your offering," she said, her words carrying a resonance that was both inside and outside their minds, a tone of profound and ancient peace. A new chapter begins. The words were not a promise of ease, but a declaration of terms. They had sanctuary, a place to live within the most beautiful prison in the universe. They were guests in a sentient library, granted asylum on the condition that they never again pick up the pen of conquest. The connection to Earth, to every dream and memory of the world they had fought to save, was not just broken. It had been willingly severed. The last tether burned away in that silent fireball above. They were the first and last colonists of KEPLER 186f, pioneers of a future that had no room for pioneers, forever separated from the humanity they had sacrificed everything to protect from itself. The first morning of their exile dawned with a soft, golden light that felt different from any before it. Lena led them away from the cavern, her steps silent and purposeful on the violet moss. They followed without question, their human instincts for direction and destination slowly eroding in the face of a world that now guided their every move. The forest itself seemed to part for them, roots gently withdrawing, branches lifting to clear a path, until they emerged into a wide, sheltered valley cradled between two crystalline ridges. A stream of impossibly clear water wound through it, and the air carried a sweet, clean scent that made their lungs feel new. This was to be their home, a classroom without walls. Lena stopped before a cluster of pale, trumpet-shaped fungi growing at the base of a luminous tree. Her hand, still shimmering with internal light, hovered over one. Her voice, layered with the planet's resonance, was a quiet instruction. "You are hungry. This world provides, but you must learn to ask." She did not pick the fungus. Instead, she gently touched its rim, and the plant released a soft chime, a single, clear note that hung in the air. Only then did she carefully break its stem. "It offers itself when it is ready. To take without listening is theft. This was their first lesson, a fundamental rewriting of the concept of survival. It was not about seizing resources, but about entering into a dialogue with the world around them. Later, as the sky deepened into twilight, she taught them to read the weather. She pointed to the high atmosphere, where the planet's energy currents painted swirling, luminous patterns. "See how the green deepens to blue and the swirls tighten there, to the west," she said. "That is the world drawing moisture from the sea. It will rain tonight, a gentle, nourishing rain. You will be safe here." They watched, mesmerized, as the celestial forecast unfolded exactly as she had described. The weather was not a random force to be endured, but a visible, intentional process of the planet's global metabolism. They were not learning to predict the storm, but to understand the gardener's schedule. Every gesture, every instruction was imbued with the same core principle. They were guests in a house of infinite complexity, and their continued welcome depended on their willingness to learn its rules, to move with its rhythms, and to finally, after a lifetime of striving for control, surrender to its care. The bioluminescent moss cast a soft, otherworldly glow on their faces, a gentle warmth emanating from its living core instead of crackling flames. It was in this quiet circle that Eris finally spoke of the world they had lost. His voice was a low murmur, thick with a nostalgia he had kept locked away. He described the forest of his youth on Earth, the way the sunlight filtered through a canopy of oak and maple, dappling the floor in patterns of gold and green. He spoke of the rough, familiar bark of his favorite climbing tree, and the crisp, earthy scent of fallen leaves in autumn. As he painted the picture with his words, something impossible began to happen. The surrounding alien flora, with its violet hues and crystalline structures, started to change. The leaves on a nearby shrub softened their sharp angles, their color shifting from deep purple to a muted, earthy green. The trunk of a great, luminous tree beside them darkened, its smooth surface becoming textured and rough, mimicking the bark Eris had just described. It was not a perfect replica, but an impression, a sympathetic echo woven from light and living matter. The planet was not just listening, it was feeling his homesickness, and in a gesture of profound empathy, it was trying to recreate a piece of his home to comfort him. The sheer, silent compassion of the act brought a tightness to every throat. They were not being manipulated or placated. They were being understood on a level so deep it defied language. In that moment, the gulf between invader and host vanished, replaced by the simple, universal ache for a place that was gone, and the astonishing kindness of a world trying to share the burden of that loss. Their new home did not rise from the ground so much as it was coaxed into being. Under Lena's quiet guidance, their hands learned the language of the planet's substance. They did not cut the trees, they persuaded them. Placing their palms against the violet bark, they would feel a resonant hum, a shared intention flowing from the planetary network through Lena and into their own minds. They would envision a wall, and the great, pliable trunks would lean and weave together, their branches intertwining to form a dense, living lattice. They thought of a roof and broad, leathery leaves unfurled overhead, overlapping into a waterproof canopy that glowed with a soft, internal light after dusk. The very stone of the valley floor was similarly receptive. A simple, focused desire for a hearth saw the rock flow like slow water, rising into a smooth, circular basin that radiated a gentle, constant warmth, a gift from the planet's own geothermal heart. This was not construction, it was collaboration, a conversation between their needs and the world's willing form. Their shelter was never truly finished. It breathed with them. If the air grew chilly, the walls would thicken slightly for insulation. When someone felt a need for solitude, a new nook would gently separate from the main living space, its entrance veiled by a curtain of phosphorescent vines. The house was not a static object, but a third participant in their lives, an organic extension of the planetary mind that anticipated their comforts and protected their peace. It was the ultimate symbol of their new reality. A perfect, dynamic symbiosis where every human need was met by a world that asked only for their respect in return. They were no longer building a life upon the land, but living a life within a conscious, caring companion. The valley's perfect peace felt like a beautiful dream, yet a single, restless thought began to echo in the quiet of their minds. They had found sanctuary, but what of the others who would inevitably follow? The specter of another ship, another crew just as desperate and just as blind to the truth, haunted their newfound tranquility. Ilya found Eva staring into the star-dusted sky, her expression one of grim resolve. "We have to warn them," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "We cannot be the last to know." The planet, sensing their shared anxiety through Lena, did not resist their plan. It was not permission so much as a quiet acknowledgement that this, too, was part of the balance, a necessary scar to prevent a greater wound. Their journey to the highest peak was not a struggle. The mountain itself seemed to assist them, the treacherous slopes easing into gentle inclines, the razor-edged cliffs softening into safe, winding paths. At the summit, the wind was a clean, cold blade, and the wreckage of their escape pod lay where it had fallen, a stark, metallic scar on the otherwise pristine crystal rock. Working together, they salvaged the emergency beacon, its casing scarred but its core components miraculously intact. With careful, deliberate hands, they reconfigured its transmission, stripping away all complex codes and identifiers, reducing its power to a mere whisper, a faint candle in the galactic wind. Ilya input the final message, the words feeling like the most important he would ever write. "KEPLER 186f is inhabited. Approach only in peace or be turned away." He looked at Eva, who gave a single, firm nod. This was not a call for rescue. It was a sentinel's duty. He activated the beacon. A single, weak red light began to pulse in rhythm with the message, a tiny, mechanical heartbeat against the immense, living pulse of the world below. They stood there for a long time, watching the light blink its simple, eternal warning into the void. It was their legacy, a final gift and a final plea to the humanity they had left behind. A single sentence standing between their old species and a war they could never win. The seasons on KEPLER 186f did not turn like those of Earth, but flowed in great, slow breaths of light and color. Months bled into one another, marked not by calendars but by the shifting luminescence of the valley and the slow, deliberate growth of their living home. Through it all, Lena was their constant guide, but her human shape was becoming less and less substantial. She was a silhouette of starlight, a ghost in the machine of the world, her form flickering like a candle flame in a gentle breeze. They all knew what was coming, a transformation as inevitable as the tide. The final evening was serene. The sky was a tapestry of deep violet, and the air was warm and still. Lena gathered them not with words, but with a soft, pulsing thought that drew them to the center of the clearing. She stood before them, her body now almost entirely transparent, a beautiful vessel through which the planet's glowing heart was clearly visible. She was a window, and on the other side was the entire world. Her voice, when it came, was a chorus of a billion leaves rustling, of streams trickling over crystal, of the deep, resonant hum of the planetary core. It was no longer layered with her own tone, but was the pure, unfiltered voice of the garden itself. "Do not be sad," the voice resonated within their minds. This form was a temporary bridge, a cocoon that has served its purpose. Her image began to gently unravel, not like smoke, but like light dissolving into a greater dawn. The shimmering particles of her being lifted into the air, catching the twilight and scattering into a million points of brilliance. "I am not gone." The words were a comfort woven from the very air around them. "I am everywhere." As the last of her visible form faded, a final, profound thought settled over them, a promise etched into their souls: "I will watch over you." And then she was gone. There was no body, no empty space where she had stood. There was only the forest, the sky, and the deep, abiding presence that had always been there, but now felt intimately familiar. Eris reached out and touched the trunk of the nearest tree, and he felt not just the planet's ancient intelligence, but a flicker of Lena's warmth, her curiosity, her protection. She was in the soft glow of the moss at their feet, in the gentle sway of the branches above, in the very soil that nurtured them. Her dissolution was not an end, but a completion. She had not been consumed by the planet. She had become one with it, her human consciousness now a permanent thread in the vast, living tapestry of the garden. The loss was profound, a human ache for a face and a voice that was gone. Yet the gain was immeasurable. They were not alone. They were loved, understood, and guarded by a friend who had transcended form to become the very world they walked upon. The torch had been passed. They were no longer just guests in the garden. They were its cherished children, and their guardian was forever home. The first sign was a subtle shift in the valley's glow. The usual soft blue-green luminescence of the moss began to pulse with delicate threads of gold and rose, a quiet, chromatic celebration that seemed to have no source. Eva noticed it first, a strange, deep-rooted warmth in her own body that had nothing to do with the ambient air. It was a feeling of profound, cellular rightness, a quiet hum of life that resonated with the very soil beneath her feet. When she shared her suspicion with Eris, his scientific mind, now so deeply attuned to the planet's rhythms, understood immediately. He placed a hand on her still flat stomach, and then on the trunk of their living home. The tree responded instantly, its bark shimmering with a cascade of silver light that raced up into the canopy. The news, it seemed, had already been known. That evening, as they sat by the warm stone hearth, the entire valley erupted in a silent, breathtaking symphony of light. Flowers of every conceivable hue burst into bloom, their petals radiating not just color, but soft, chiming notes that filled the air with a living music. The stream glittered with submerged, gem-like algae, and the very air thickened with the scent of sweet, celebratory nectar. It was a planet-wide festival, a display of pure, unadulterated joy for the new life growing within her. Then the voice came, not as a single thought, but as a chorus of rustling leaves and babbling water, a wave of benevolent warmth that washed over them both. The child, the garden communicated, its tone resonating with a love so vast it was almost overwhelming, will be the first. Not a colonist, not an exile, but a true native. This one's roots will be in both soils, its heart beating in two rhythms. It will be the bridge we have woven together, a living promise for all the generations to come. Eva felt tears stream down her face, not of sadness or fear, but of a belonging so complete it ached. The child would never know the strife of earth, nor the loneliness of the void. It would be cradled by a conscious world, taught by its very breath, and loved by a parent that was both human and planet. This was not just a pregnancy, it was a covenant, the first true flowering of a hybrid future, born not of conquest, but of a hard-won and sacred peace. The valley's perpetual spring was interrupted by a low, resonant hum that seemed to emanate from the planet's very bones. It was not a sound of alarm, but a deep, melodic call that vibrated through the soles of their feet and up into their chests. Across the forest, the usual gentle glow of the Flora intensified, shifting from a placid blue-green to a brilliant, pulsating gold. The air grew thick with a sweet, ozone-rich scent, and a profound sense of anticipation settled over everything. Eris and Eva stood at the edge of their clearing, watching as the luminous beings they had come to know as the planet's other children began to emerge from the woods. These were the tall, shimmering entities of woven light, the same kind that had first observed them upon their arrival, but now their movements were different. They were not drifting with quiet curiosity, but processing with a slow, deliberate purpose, all flowing in the same direction toward the distant cavern of the heart. It was a silent, radiant pilgrimage, The humans followed, drawn by a compulsion they did not understand, their path once again made easy by the accommodating forest. They arrived at the lip of the great cavern, looking down into the cathedral space. The sight that greeted them stole their breath. Dozens of the light entities were gathered around the colossal, crystalline heart, which now pulsed with a furious, loving light. One by one, the entities approached the core. They did not hesitate. They pressed their luminous forms against the intricate facets of the heart, and as they made contact, they began to dissolve. It was not a violent unraveling like the one that had consumed Ben Carter. This was a serene, willing surrender. Their individual forms streamed into the heart like rivers flowing into an ocean, their light merging with the greater glow, their unique patterns of energy dissolving back into the source. As each one was absorbed, the heart pulsed brighter, and from its other side, new, smaller motes of light would emerge, flickering and innocent, to be gathered gently by the glowing roots, and carried away to be woven into new forms: a sparkling fungus, a sapling with bark of living amethyst, a tiny, skittering creature of pure energy. This was not death. It was a transfiguration. Eva watched, her hand resting on her swelling belly, and she finally understood. The planet had no concept of mortality as a final, terrifying end. For this world, life was a continuous, breathing loop. A mature consciousness, having experienced all it could in one form, would willingly return its energy and memories to the collective source, sacrificing its individuality to fuel the birth of countless new lives. It was the ultimate act of love for the garden, a perpetual renewal that ensured no knowledge was ever truly lost, only recycled and reborn in an infinite variety of expressions. The fear of death that had haunted humanity since its first breath simply did not exist here. It had been replaced by a sacred, cyclical trust. Eris felt the philosophical foundations of his entire life shift and crumble. He had always seen existence as a linear march toward an inevitable, personal conclusion. But here, in the silent, radiant glow of this cosmic return, he witnessed a different truth. The individual was a temporary vessel for experience, a beautiful, fleeting note in an eternal song. Letting go was not a failure, but a final, graceful gift to the whole. He looked at Eva, at the new life growing within her, and he saw not just a child, but a future participant in this magnificent, endless dance. They were no longer exiles waiting to die. They were now part of a cycle that defined life itself, a cycle where an ending was always and only a new beginning. The sky that night was a silent, star-flecked tapestry, and then it began to weep fire. A meteor shower of breathtaking intensity streaked into the atmosphere, a torrent of burning rock that would have scarred any other world. But here, the streaks of light did not scream toward impact. They slowed, their violent trajectories bending into gentle, controlled arcs, as if caught in the palm of an invisible, celestial hand. High above, the planet's energy leviathans, those vast formations of woven lightning, moved with a serene, choreographed grace. They did not destroy the meteors. They herded them, their luminous bodies nudging the falling stones like shepherds guiding a flock, steering the entire fiery procession toward a designated, barren region far to the north. Eris and Eva watched, their faces bathed in the otherworldly light of the event, a display that was both beautiful and humbling. It was a cosmic cleaning, a demonstration of a world that did not merely endure the violence of space, but actively managed it. Later, from a high ridge, they saw the result. In the desolate basin, the meteors were not sitting as craters or rubble. They were being dismantled. Tendrils of pure energy, similar to those that had assimilated Lena, flowed over the celestial rocks, breaking them down with silent, impossible efficiency. The stone itself seemed to dissolve into shimmering streams of elemental dust iron, nickel, silicates, which were then drawn down into the soil, absorbed by the planet's glowing root system. It was a harvest. The planet was not just protecting itself from a threat. It was collecting valuable resources, nutrients from the void to feed its endless, living cycle. This was the final piece of the puzzle, the answer to a question they had never thought to ask. The garden was not a static paradise. It was a dynamic, intelligent system that curated its entire environment, from the smallest microbe to the largest asteroid, with a gentle, unshakable mastery. They were living inside a mind that could catch stars and turn them into soil. A guardian so powerful it treated falling mountains as a gentle rain of fertilizer. The gentle stream did not merely flow past Eris, it seemed to breathe with him, its crystalline waters carrying a current of feeling that was not his own. At first, it was a vague impression, a background hum of serene contentment that colored the air when they moved through the forest with quiet, deliberate steps, when Eva tended to the glowing fungi with the reverence Lena had taught them. It felt like the warmth of a parent's approval, a silent, planet-wide nod that resonated in his very bones. Then came the first shock of dissonance. He was clearing a small area for a new herb bed, his mind focused on the task, when a sudden, sharp sensation pierced his meditation, a jolt of pure, undiluted alarm, like a silent scream that echoed through the network of roots beneath his feet. It was not a sound, but a visceral wave of protective urgency that made his heart hammer in his chest. He froze, his hands trembling, and looked down. There, nestled in a tiny hollow his boot had almost crushed, was a cluster of pearlescent eggs, no larger than his thumbnail, pulsing with a soft, frantic light. He had not seen them, but the planet had felt his clumsy intrusion. The alarm did not fade until he had carefully repaired the soil around the nest, his own remorse a quiet offering. This was the new, terrifying language of his life. He was developing a psychic bond with his home, a slow, cellular integration that allowed him to feel the garden's moods as if they were his own. His thoughts were no longer entirely private, and the world's well-being was becoming his own emotional weather, a deep and unbreakable connection that was both a profound gift and the final, gentle dissolution of the man he had once been. The stream of shared feeling between Eris and the planet deepened one morning into a clear, silent invitation. A path through the woods, one they had never noticed before, now glowed with a soft, insistent light, leading away from their tranquil valley and into a region of jagged, obsidian cliffs. The air grew cold and still as they descended into a vast, shadowed chasm, its walls so high they blotted out the sun. And there, preserved in the perpetual twilight, was the garden's grim and silent library. It was not a collection of books, but of ghosts. Half buried in the violet soil and entwined with glowing roots were the shattered husks of starships. One was a crystalline vessel, its structure like a frozen spiderweb, now cracked and dull. Another was a brutal wedge of dark, pitted metal, its aggressive lines softened by centuries of slow, patient overgrowth. There were organic-looking pods, now empty and fossilized, and angular craft, whose purposes were utterly alien. Each wreck was a tombstone, a memorial to a civilization that had reached for the stars only to find a final, absolute judgment here. The planet did not offer their names or their histories. It simply presented the evidence, a gallery of failure that spanned millennia. These were not the remains of explorers who had come in peace. The garden communicated the truth through a wave of somber feeling, a deep, resonant sorrow for the necessity of it all. Each of these visitors had brought the same sickness, the same unshakable belief that this world was theirs to take. They had fired weapons, drilled into the crust, and seeded their own biology, just as humanity had intended. And for their refusal to listen, for their unwavering violence, they had been gently, permanently added to the collection. This canyon was not a junkyard. It was a quarantine zone for failed ambitions, a permanent warning etched into the very bones of the world. To stand among the silent, broken ships was to feel the weight of cosmic patience, and to understand with chilling finality the one rule that could never be broken. The first chill was a soft whisper against their skin, a new sensation in the perpetually temperate air of the valley. Over the next few days, the change became undeniable. The forest's vibrant, pulsating glow began to soften, the brilliant blues and greens dimming to a deep, tranquil indigo, as if the entire world was settling into a long, comfortable sigh. Then the snow came. It did not fall as frozen water, but as delicate, geometric flakes of pure, crystalline light. They drifted from the violet sky in a silent, mesmerizing dance, each one a tiny, six-pointed star that glowed with a soft, internal radiance. Where they landed, they did not melt into cold slush, but accumulated like a blanket of living diamonds, covering the ground and the branches in a shimmering, serene quiet. It was breathtakingly beautiful, a scene that echoed the hushed winters of Earth, yet was utterly alien in its luminous grace. The entity's presence, which they now felt as a constant, warm hum in their minds, swelled with a feeling of deep contentment. This is the long dreaming, it communicated, the thought carrying the image of a great being closing its eyes in rest. The garden sleeps, not in death, but in renewal. It draws its energy inward, to dream new life into being for the cycle to come. The falling light is not cold, but a blanket of stored memories, a lullaby for the world. Eris caught one of the crystalline flakes on his glove. It did not feel cold, but pulsed with a gentle warmth, and for a fleeting second, he felt a wave of profound peace, a memory from a tree that had stood for 10,000 years. This was not a season of barren death, but one of quiet, internal creation. They watched from the entrance of their living home as the luminous snow deepened, transforming their familiar valley into a sacred, silent cathedral. It was a reminder that even a conscious planet needs its rest, and that the most profound growth often happens in the deepest quiet. The labor was not a struggle, but a surrender to the planet's own rhythms. Eva felt no fear, only a profound sense of being held, guided by a presence that understood the ancient process far better than she ever could. The very walls of their living home softened, curving into a gentle, supportive cradle around her, while the air thickened with the scent of calming, floral nectar. When the final push came, it was not a wave of pain, but a tide of immense, collaborative energy, the world itself helping to usher the new life into its embrace. The baby's first cry was a soft, healthy sound, quickly soothed by the harmonious chime of the glowing moss beneath them. Eris, with trembling hands, lifted his daughter, and in that first, breathtaking moment, her eyes opened. They were a deep human blue, but for a single, fleeting second, they flashed with the same soft, blue-green luminescence that pulsed through the heart of the planet. It was a spark of shared identity, a biological welcome from the world that had already claimed her as its own. A wave of pure, resonant warmth flowed through the ground, a palpable, joyous energy that made the entire shelter glow with a brighter, celebratory light. The entity's voice bloomed in their minds not as a single thought, but as a chorus of rustling leaves and chiming crystals, filled with a love as vast as the cosmos. Her name is Astra, it communicated, the word carrying the image of a newborn star, a point of brilliant, unique light in an infinite tapestry. She is the first true child of two worlds, a living promise that the future will be different from the past. As if in response, the infant, Astra, cooed softly, her tiny hand curling around Eris's finger, and the ground beneath them pulsed once more with a warm, welcoming energy, as if the entire garden was sighing in deep, contented peace. Astra's first steps were a dance of light and life. She wobbled on unsteady legs, her small form silhouetted against the glowing moss of the clearing, and before she could tumble, the air around her shimmered. Half a dozen tiny, playful light forms, no larger than her own hands, darted from the surrounding ferns. They zipped and swirled around her, not as a threat, but as a supportive, living net. One would gently nudge her elbow when she leaned too far. Another would hover just ahead, pulsing with an encouraging glow, as if showing her the way. She giggled, her human laughter mingling with their soft, chime-like sounds, and reached for them as if they were fireflies from a terrestrial fairy tale. This was no random act of planetary curiosity. It was a conscious, communal celebration. The small entities were not just preventing a fall, they were inviting her into their play, treating her not as a fragile alien child to be observed from a distance, but as a young sibling learning to navigate their shared home. In that simple, profound moment, the last ghost of humanity's exile finally dissolved. Astra would never know the feeling of being an intruder or a guest. She was, and would always be, a native, her existence woven into the very fabric of the planet's family from her very first breath. Her steps were more than a physical milestone. They were the first, hopeful footsteps of a truly unified future. A future where two kinds of consciousness could grow up together, not as master and subject, but as beloved kin. The need to speak to the future became a quiet, persistent hum in their minds, a final echo of their old human duty. Ilya found the perfect slate on the valley's northern ridge, a vast, flat wall of dark, igneous rock that caught the morning sun. It was not a monument to conquest, but a confessional, a surface waiting for their truth. He and Eris began the work with simple stone tools, the rhythmic chipping of rock against rock, a primal sound in the luminous stillness. They did not carve instructions or coordinates. They carved the story. One panel showed the proud silhouette of the Odysseus arriving in orbit. Another depicted the first terrifying encounter with the shimmering entity of woven light. With painstaking detail, they etched the swarm of energy creatures phasing through the lander's hull, the heart of the planet pulsing in its subterranean cathedral, and the tragic, fiery dissolution of Ben Carter. They showed the mutiny on the ship, the desperate battle between fear and conscience, and the final, silent sacrifice as the Odysseus tore itself apart to protect the garden. Each scene was a chapter of their failure, a testament to the arrogance that had nearly cost them everything. But the final panels were different. Here, they carved their redemption. They showed Lena, her form dissolving into light to become the bridge. They depicted the arrival of Astra, cradled by the glowing forest, a symbol of the new peace they had forged. The last image was not of them, but of the planet itself, its roots and branches embracing the entire stone, a guardian watching over the record of its own mercy. This was their legacy, not a warning to stay away, but an invitation to understand. They were building a library of their own, a single, patient book written in stone, left for any who might come after to find, and if they were wise enough to read it, to learn from the terrible, beautiful price of peace. Eris drifted into sleep not as an escape, but as a doorway. That night, the darkness behind his eyelids did not remain dark. It swirled with color and sensation, pulling him into a current of pure memory that was not his own. He was no longer in his body. He was the soil, cool and rich, cradling a single, dormant seed. He felt the first tentative push of a root, the delicate search for moisture and nutrient. Then came the sun, not as a distant ball of fire, but as a wave of nourishing energy that he drank in through nascent leaves. He experienced the slow, patient unfurling of a bud, the intricate choreography of cellular division that built a blossom of impossible, crystalline geometry. He felt the purpose of each part, the leaf designed to catch a specific frequency of light, the stem engineered to sway in the prevailing wind. This was not a lesson from a book. It was a direct, empathic download of a life's entire history, a gift of understanding that bypassed his intellect and settled deep into his bones. He awoke with a gasp, the scent of that specific flower still vivid in his nostrils, its entire biological purpose now a quiet, certain knowledge within him. He had not dreamed about the flower, he had dreamed as the flower. Eva's wide eyes met his across their sleeping alcove. She had been a sky whale, a vast, gentle leviathan of woven gas and light, riding the thermal currents of the upper atmosphere for a century. She had felt the ancient, magnetic pathways of the planet as clear lines of force in her mind, a navigational map written in the stars and the planet's own pulsing heart. She had known the purpose of her great migration, to distribute vital atmospheric elements and to sing the old, stabilizing songs to the weather patterns far below. Their shared discovery was more profound than any data stream. This was how the planet taught its children, not through lectures, but through lived experience. Sleep became their most valuable classroom. They learned the cooperative language of the forest's root network by spending a night as a single, glowing filament, sharing nutrients and alarm signals with 1,000 other plants. They understood the delicate balance of the ecosystem by living the life of a predator and its prey, feeling the necessity of both roles in the great, circulating dance of energy. One night, Ilya dreamed he was the planet's heart itself. He felt the immense, gentle pressure of its vigilance, the constant, low-level awareness of every leaf, every stream, every creature on the surface. He felt the deep, enduring love it held for all of them, and the quiet sorrow it carried for the countless worlds that had not been saved. He awoke with tears drying on his cheeks, the weight of 1 billion years of guardianship a humbling mantle on his soul. These were not passive hallucinations. They were active, participatory histories. The planet was not just showing them its past, it was inviting them to feel its responsibilities, to understand the immense, delicate cost of the peace they now enjoyed. Each dream was a thread, carefully weaving their own small, human consciousnesses into the vast, living tapestry of the garden, until they could no longer tell where their own memories ended and the planet's timeless story began. Years bled into one another with the gentle rhythm of a heartbeat. The small human family no longer measured time by clocks or calendars, but by the slow, graceful growth of their living home and the luminous milestones of their daughter's life. Every piece of technology they had brought from Earth was now gone, its materials long ago absorbed back into the soil, its purpose rendered obsolete. They felt no deprivation, only a profound liberation. Their needs were met not by machines but by a conscious, caring world. When they were hungry, the forest offered up its ripe, nourishing fruits. When they were thirsty, the stream provided water so pure it tasted like clarity itself. Shelter was a living embrace, warmth radiated from the very ground, and light was a gift the world gave each evening. This was not mere survival. It was a symbiosis so complete they could no longer remember the frantic, grasping anxiety that had defined their lives on a crowded, dying Earth. There, their purpose had been a narrow thing, a struggle for personal space and dwindling resources in a gray, concrete world. Here, their purpose was woven into the very fabric of existence. They were the garden's chroniclers, its students, and its devoted children. A sense of belonging, deep and unshakable, had taken root in their souls. They were no longer visitors or even guests. They were a vital, loved part of a whole. Their every breath a quiet conversation with a world that cherished them. This was the ultimate testament to adaptation, not a struggle against nature, but a graceful surrender to a greater, kinder intelligence. The signal was a whisper of structured mathematics, a gentle ripple in the silence they had guarded for so long. It did not carry the aggressive, encrypted demands of a military vessel, but the open, curious harmonics of a scientific probe. The entity's presence, a constant warmth in their minds, swelled not with alarm, but with a profound and patient satisfaction. It had waited for this, hoped for this very thing. A wave of serene purpose flowed from the planet's heart, an unspoken directive that resonated through the roots beneath their feet and the air in their lungs. They were to go to the ridge, to the beacon. Their long vigil as sentinels was over. A new role now began. Eva felt a tremor that was entirely her own, a flutter of ancient, human nervousness she had almost forgotten. Ilya stood a little straighter, the ghost of his captain's posture returning to his shoulders. Eris simply smiled, his hand finding Eva's, their fingers interlacing. They did not need to speak. They gathered a few simple things, a gourd of water, some journey bread offered by the forest, and began the familiar climb. The path glowed with a soft, guiding light, the trees leaning back to ease their passage. It was not a march to a confrontation, but a walk to meet a long-lost cousin at the garden gate. Astra, now a young woman with eyes that held the light of two worlds, walked beside them, her expression one of calm curiosity. She had only ever known the family of the garden. The concept of more people, people from the sky like her parents, was a story made real. When they reached the summit, the sky was clear, a deep violet canopy awaiting its guest. The beacon still pulsed its simple warning, but now it was joined by a new, answering rhythm from the void. They stood together, a family of exiles turned ambassadors, ready to translate the language of the garden for those who had finally learned to listen. A new star was being born in the velvet darkness above them, its light a steady, deliberate pulse against the tapestry of the old constellations. It was the ship, its approach a quiet declaration that humanity had at long last learned to listen. Eva stood on the high ridge, the wind a gentle hand in her hair, and felt her daughter Astra's presence beside her, a quiet strength radiating from the young woman who had never known any world but this one. She did not look up with the desperate hunger of an exile, nor with the fearful tension of a soldier awaiting a new invasion. Her gaze was that of a gardener watching a long-dormant seed finally break through the soil. "We came to change a world," she whispered, the words carried away on the breeze, but it was the world that changed us. The simple truth held the weight of their entire history, the collapse of their mission, the loss of their comrades, and the hard-won wisdom that had grown from the ashes of their ambition. They had arrived as conquerors, armed with the arrogance of a species that believed the universe was theirs to shape. They had been humbled, not by a superior weapon, but by a superior understanding, by a consciousness that valued the intricate web of life over the lonely pinnacle of dominance. The redemptive power of coexistence was not an abstract philosophy here. It was the very air they breathed, the light that warmed them, the bond they shared with every leaf and stone. The new ship in orbit was not a threat, but a promise, a chance to extend that hard-learned lesson across the void, to offer a hand in friendship rather than a closed fist. The story of the Odysseus would not end in tragedy or silence, but in this quiet moment of connection, a poignant closure that bloomed into the thrilling possibility of a new beginning for both of their peoples.